The year is 1957. The United States is a nation gripped by a peculiar kind of frost, the Cold War. On a crisp October night, the world looks up to see a tiny, blinking light crossing the sky. It is Sputnik, the first man-made satellite, launched by the Soviet Union. For the American public, it is a marvel. For the American military, it is a terrifying wake-up call. If the Soviets could put a satellite in orbit, they could put a nuclear warhead on a missile. The technological gap felt like a chasm, and the Pentagon knew that the future of national security wouldn't be won with just more soldiers, but with better ideas. In response, President Dwight D. Eisenhower created ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. Its mission was simple but incredibly ambitious: ensure the United States never suffered a technological surprise again. But ARPA faced a hidden, fundamental problem. The nation's communication system was fragile. At the time, if you wanted to send information from Washington to Los Angeles, it traveled through a centralized network of telephone wires. If a single major hub was hit by a strike, the entire country would go silent. The military needed a way to communicate that had no head, a system that could survive even if parts of it were destroyed. Enter the dreamers. J.C.R. Licklider, a visionary psychologist and computer scientist, began talking about a galactic network. He didn't just want a military tool. He imagined a world where everyone was interconnected, accessing data from anywhere. At the same time, a brilliant engineer named Paul Baran was rethinking how data moved. Instead of sending a continuous stream of information like a phone call, he proposed breaking it into tiny pieces called packets. These packets would find their own path through a web of nodes, reassembling at the destination. If one path was blocked, the packets would simply flow around it. By 1969, the theory was ready to become reality. A small team at a firm called BBN built the first routers, massive rugged machines the size of refrigerators called IMPs. The first two nodes were installed at UCLA and Stanford Research Institute. On October 29th, a young graduate student named Charlie Klein sat at a terminal at UCLA, prepared to send the first message in history to the computer in Stanford. The plan was to type the word login. The room was silent, filled only with the hum of heavy cooling fans. Klein typed the letter L and confirmed over the phone that it was received. He typed the O. It arrived. Then he typed the G, and the system crashed. The first message ever sent across the predecessor of the Internet was simply LO. It was unintentional, but in hindsight, it felt like the beginning of a hello world for the entire human race. They fixed the bug an hour later and successfully completed the word, but the LO remained as a symbol of the humble, glitchy birth of a giant. This was ARPANET. It wasn't the Internet we know today. There were no websites, no videos, and no social media. It was a cold, text-based tool for scientists and soldiers. But the DNA of the modern United States was being rewritten in those lines of code. For the first time, distance was beginning to disappear. The Cold War project had successfully built a network that couldn't be killed by a bomb, but in doing so, they had accidentally built a platform that would eventually change how every American worked, shopped, and dreamed. The digital age hadn't just arrived, it had spoken its first two letters.
By the early 1990s, the Internet was like a secret garden, vast and full of potential, but hidden behind walls of complex code and academic jargon. If you weren't a scientist or a defense contractor, the information superhighway was a road you couldn't find on any map. But in 1993, a group of young programmers at the University of Illinois released a tool that tore those walls down. It was called Mosaic, the first web browser to display images alongside text. Suddenly, the Internet had a face. It was no longer a series of green glowing letters on a black screen. It was a window into a new world. The transition from a military experiment to a consumer obsession happened with a speed that left America breathless. In 1995, a startup called Netscape went public. On its first day of trading, the company, which didn't yet make a profit, saw its value soar to nearly $3 billion. This was the starting gun for the dot-com boom. Silicon Valley, once a quiet region of orchards and hardware labs, transformed overnight into the financial heart of the planet. For the average American, the revolution arrived not with a bang, but with a screech. It was the iconic, mechanical sound of the 56K dial-up modem, a symphony of digital handshakes that tied up the family phone line for hours. Services like America Online, AOL, mailed millions of floppy disks and CDs to every household in the country. "You've got mail" became the most famous 4 words in the American vocabulary. We weren't just checking messages, we were entering a new dimension of human connection. As the mid-90s progressed, the digital gold rush began in earnest. In a garage in Seattle, Jeff Bezos started a small online bookstore called Amazon, betting that people would eventually trust a stranger on a screen with their credit card numbers. In California, Pierre Omidyar launched an auction site called eBay after successfully selling a broken laser pointer to a collector. These weren't just businesses, they were experiments in trust. They changed the American identity from a window shopper to a click-and-buy consumer. By 1999, the enthusiasm had turned into a fever. The stock market was fueled by irrational exuberance. Any company with a .com at the end of its name could attract millions in investment, even if they had no business plan. This was the era of Pets.com and its famous sock puppet mascot, a symbol of a time when the sky seemed to have no limit. Super Bowl commercials were bought by companies that would vanish 6 months later. The NASDAQ Composite Index doubled in just 1 year. But, as every historian knows, every gold rush has an end. In March 2000, the bubble finally burst. The realization set in that many of these companies were built on hype rather than profit. Within months, $5 trillion in market value evaporated. Thousands of young dot-commers who had been millionaires on paper found themselves looking for work as the servers were shut down and the office furniture was auctioned off. Yet, while the bubble was gone, the boom had left something permanent behind. The crash cleared away the pretenders, but it left the infrastructure in place. High-speed fiber optic cables had been laid across the country. The survivors, Google, Amazon, and eBay, were no longer fragile startups. They were the new titans of the American economy. The United States had been permanently rewired. We had learned that while money could vanish in a click, the new way of living, the digital life, was here to stay. The commercialization of the internet hadn't just changed where we shopped, it had changed the very nature of the American dream. After the dust settled from the dot-com crash of 2000, the internet didn't go away, it grew up. The early web had been a giant library where you could read, but you couldn't really speak back. That changed in 2004 with a concept called Web 2.0. We were moving from the read-only web to the read-write web. The internet was about to stop being a tool for information and start being a platform for human identity. The spark of this social revolution ignited in a Harvard dormitory. Mark Zuckerberg and his co-founders launched the Facebook in 2004, a digital directory that tapped into a fundamental human desire, the need to see and be seen. Within a few years, it jumped from elite universities to the general public, turning the profile into our second skin. We weren't just users anymore, we were curators of our own lives. The like button, introduced in 2009, created a new currency, the currency of social validation. While Facebook captured our relationships, YouTube captured our eyes. In 2005, 3 former PayPal employees uploaded a grainy 19-second video of a guy at the San Diego Zoo. It was the first brick in what would become a global empire of user-generated content. Suddenly, you didn't need a multi-million-dollar studio to reach an audience. A teenager in a bedroom in Ohio could have more subscribers than a national news network. The gatekeepers of Hollywood and New York were losing their grip. Then came the year that changed everything, 2007. Steve Jobs stood on a stage in San Francisco and pulled the first iPhone from his pocket. Before that moment, the internet was a destination, somewhere you went when you sat down at a desk. After that moment, the internet was a companion. It was in our pockets, on our nightstands, and at our dinner tables. The rise of the mobile web meant that we were now connected 24/7. This was the birth of the attention economy. In 2006, Twitter emerged, teaching us to think in 140 characters. It transformed the news cycle from a 24-hour loop into a second-by-second heartbeat. If something happened in a small town in Middle America, the whole world knew within minutes. We saw the birth of citizen journalism, where a person with a smartphone could document history more effectively than a professional camera crew. But this revolution had a complex side. As we became more connected, we also became more exposed. The public square was now owned by private corporations. Our data, what we liked, where we went, and who we talked to, became the most valuable commodity in the world. Algorithms began to learn our preferences, feeding us more of what we already believed, creating echo chambers that would eventually reshape American politics. The social revolution was more than just new apps. It was a shift in human psychology. We began to live life for the post as much as for the experience itself. The boundary between our private lives and our public personas began to blur. By the end of this decade, the United States was a different country. We were more connected than ever before in history, yet we were beginning to feel a new kind of digital loneliness. We had built a world where everyone had a voice, and now the challenge was learning how to listen amidst the noise. As the second decade of the 21st century dawned, the internet underwent its most physical transformation yet. It moved from being a place we visited to the very fabric of how we lived, worked, and moved. In 2011, venture capitalist Mark Andreessen famously wrote that software is eating the world, and nowhere was this more evident than in the changing landscape of the American economy. The digital world was no longer just about information, it was about the orchestration of physical reality. The first major tremor was the rise of the gig economy. In 2009, a startup called Uber launched in San Francisco with a simple premise: everyone's private driver. By turning the smartphone into a remote control for the physical world, Uber and its competitor, Lyft, dismantled the century-old taxi industry. Soon, this platform model spread to every corner of life. Airbnb turned millions of Americans' spare bedrooms into hotel suites. DoorDash and Instacart turned every local restaurant and grocery store into a delivery service. For the American worker, this was a double-edged sword. It offered unprecedented flexibility, the ability to be your own boss and set your own hours, but it also eroded the traditional social contract. The security of health insurance, pensions, and a steady paycheck was replaced by the hustle. The workforce became fragmented as millions of Americans traded the office cubicle for the driver's seat or the delivery bike, governed not by a human manager, but by an algorithm. Simultaneously, the American landscape was being physically reshaped by the Amazon effect. The 20th century icon of American life, the suburban shopping mall, began to wither. Thousands of brick-and-mortar stores closed their doors in what became known as the retail apocalypse. In their place rose massive, windowless fulfillment centers, millions of square feet in size, strategically placed near major highways. The sound of the American economy changed from the chatter of shoppers in a plaza to the constant hum of delivery vans idling in residential driveways. This economic shift reached a breaking point in 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic acted as a time machine, dragging the future into the present almost overnight. For millions of Americans, the office vanished, replaced by a Zoom window on a kitchen table. The remote work revolution proved that for much of the professional class, physical presence was no longer a requirement for productivity. This led to a migration, as workers fled expensive tech hubs like San Francisco and New York for more affordable Zoom towns in the heartland. The geography of the American dream was being redrawn. However, this digital transformation exposed a deep and painful digital divide. As high-speed internet became as essential as water or electricity, those without it, primarily in rural areas and low-income urban neighborhoods, found themselves locked out of the new economy.
Education, healthcare, and job opportunities moved online, leaving millions of Americans on the wrong side of the screen. By the mid-2020s, the United States had become a fully digital society. We had gained incredible convenience and efficiency, but we had lost the clear boundaries between work time and home time and between online and offline. The digital economy didn't just change our bank accounts, it changed our neighborhoods, our daily routines, and our social fabric. We had built a world where everything was available at the touch of a button, but we were still learning how to live in a society where the machine never sleeps.
For decades, the internet was hailed as the great equalizer, a tool that would bypass traditional gatekeepers and give every American a voice in the halls of power. We believed that more information would naturally lead to a more informed and united citizenry. But as we moved into the third decade of the 21st century, we realized that the internet didn't just give us a voice, it gave us a mirror. And what we saw reflecting back was a nation more divided than at any point since the Civil War. The shift began with a silent change in the code. To keep us scrolling, social media platforms developed algorithms designed to maximize engagement. These digital editors learned that nothing keeps a human being engaged quite like outrage and tribalism. Gradually, the American public square was replaced by thousands of echo chambers. We stopped seeing the same news and started living in different realities. By 2016, the term filter bubble became part of the national vocabulary. We were no longer debating the same facts, we were debating different versions of the truth. The 2016 presidential election served as a massive shock to the system. It revealed the power of micro-targeting and the dark side of data. The Cambridge Analytica scandal showed that our private data, the things we liked, the people we followed, could be weaponized to manipulate our fears and biases. The town hall of American politics had been moved behind closed doors, where political odds were tailored to the individual, invisible to the rest of the public. This wasn't just a change in campaigning, it was a fundamental change in how a democracy functions. As we moved toward the 2020s, the threat shifted from the manipulation of data to the manipulation of reality itself. We entered the era of disinformation. Foreign adversaries and domestic actors alike discovered that it was cheaper to destroy the truth than to win an argument. The rise of deepfakes, AI-generated videos and audio that can make anyone say anything, meant that our own eyes could no longer be trusted. The phrase post-truth began to haunt the American discourse. But the story of the internet in America is not just a tragedy of division, it is also a story of unprecedented empowerment. The same tools that fueled polarization also fueled the greatest social movements of our time. From hashtag Black Lives Matter to the mobilization of rural voters, the internet allowed marginalized voices to organize with a speed and scale that would have been impossible in the age of paper and ink. It proved that while the internet can be a weapon of the powerful, it remains a tool for the grassroots. Today, we stand at the threshold of the AI revolution. We are moving from an internet of searching to an internet of generating. As artificial intelligence begins to write our emails, code our software, and even drive our cars, we are facing the ultimate question: what does it mean to be human in a digital world? We are experimenting with Web3 and metaverses, trying to find a way to own our digital identities and escape the grip of big tech giants. The history of the internet in the United States is the history of a nation trying to keep up with its own brilliance. We have built a world that is faster, smarter, and more connected than our ancestors could have dreamed. But we have also built a world that is more fragile and more volatile. As we look toward the horizon, one thing is certain: the internet is no longer a separate place we go to. It is the oxygen of American life. It is the infrastructure of our economy, the battlefield of our politics, and the archive of our memories. The digital frontier is no longer out there. It is here, inside our pockets and inside our minds. The next chapter of the American story will not be written on parchment, but in code, and it is up to us to decide what that code will say.